Climate Change Committee interview series' second episode.
This interview series is run by the Climate Change Committee, a club based in Massachusetts dedicated to spreading awareness in climate change. You can find our interviews on our YouTube channel and on any podcast platform.
I'm Sugita.
And I'm Avanthika.
And we are today's hosts.
Today we're meeting with Dr. Nicole Hill, a professor at Natural and Applied Sciences at Bentley University.
She teaches her students about water resources, energy, and climate change, and has received numerous awards and grants for her work and teaching.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And as you said, I am a lecturer in natural applied sciences at Bentley University. And my focus is in environmental sciences, those fields related to that. And I have my PhD from Cornell University, where my research focused on biogeochemistry and climate.
The first question we have is just to get to know what you do on a day-to-day basis as a teacher. So we want to know, what does your course at Bentley cover?
So this semester, I'm teaching courses in environmental chemistry and water quality. So environmental chemistry really studies the movement and change of matter. And so segments of the course deal with water and air pollution. I look at energy in that course. We study climate change. And specifically with regards to climate change, our emphasis is on the chemistry of greenhouse gases. And then in water quality is really the physical, chemical, and biological properties of water that are necessary to perform the function of water. So by function, I mean, is the water meant to be drinking water? Is it meant to be used for recreational purposes, for fisheries, for wildlife protection? So depending on how water is used, there are different requirements on those parameters. And so also I have taught a course in global climate change before, and that looks at climate physics and the controls on climate throughout all of Earth's geologic history. I've taught courses in environmental physics, so that looks at how mass and energy moves around Earth and how it can be applied to problems in sustainability and energy and climate and water as well.
So what do you think the most interesting thing that you teach is?
So subject-wise, I really enjoy teaching students how to problem solve and think systematically, so taking the systems approach. And the way that I do that is in every course, I teach a lesson on Earth's energy budget. So where does Earth get its energy from, and how does it leave Earth? What are some of the interactions that take place?
Were you always a climate change professor, or did you previously teach something else, or were you previously interested in something else completely?
So I've been teaching full-time for about 5 years now, and I've taught around a dozen different courses in that time. So I've taught courses at least related to earth and environmental sciences, but I've also taught courses in engineering, such as engineering thermodynamics. I've taught programming courses in MATLAB, courses in Microsoft Excel. I've taught upper level math courses. So I've taught multivariate calculus, that's Calc 3. I've taught discrete math, so that's like proofwriting and logic, and also calc-based probability and statistics. So I've taught lots of different things.
So even though you taught math and engineering and all of that, what inspired you to ultimately teach climate change?
So when I was in high school, I really loved art. I loved drawing, I loved painting, and I was good at math and science, and I just did not know what I wanted to do. And my guidance counselor kind of convinced me, well, you're good at math and science, you should think about engineering. And my dad was a mechanical engineer, so it wasn't something that was like super strange to me. And so I applied to school for engineering because I wanted to make money. I didn't think I could really do that as an artist. Some people do, but I wanted to make money. And I'm a runner and I love being outside and hiking. I'm like, oh, let's do something that could bring me outdoors, maybe where I won't be in a lab all the time. So I transferred into civil engineering. It's like, well, it's still in engineering. And a branch of civil engineering is environmental engineering. And I discovered that I really did enjoy teaching. And physics also became like, this feels really abstract. I miss working with my hands. I miss really the direct applicability of civil engineering. And then I took a course in geophysics, and I was like, wow, I'm learning how the earth was formed and climate and all these really cool things that actually excite me, that I'm really interested in. And I can use physics in this way. And so ultimately, I ended up taking just more courses in like geoscience and climate. And then I started applying to grad schools like, okay, I want to do something with the earth. I knew I wanted to do that. But, and then I got accepted into a program at Cornell where I'd be studying like carbon and nitrogen cycling in water. And that was where I was really at my fork. And so really that's how I got into climate science. And I think just about every program that I applied to for grad school was associated to climate in some way.
But for those who ultimately decide that they want to go with climate change, maybe even some of your students, what are some career options available with education about climate change? So what do you see your students pursuing? What do you see in general, people who have an interest in climate change? What are some of their options as careers?
Oh, there are all kinds of options. They do have offices of sustainability. They have directors of sustainability, different businesses. There is the business approach, but you could also, of course, go into education, whether it's higher education as a teacher or as a researcher or both. You could also do public outreach. You could work at some kind of college extension, teaching the public about climate change. You can work for a museum teaching public about climate change, right? There's the research sector, either in academia, in the government, right? You could do NASA, the Forestry Service, NCAR, like I just said, the NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, EPA, US Geological Survey, Fish and Wildlife. Like there's tons, or you can do private or grassroots. So you can participate in research.
So your course seems super interesting, and it seems like you could do a lot of things with that education, but we want to know if you've done any projects or experiences that are part of your course.
I do have my water quality students do a final project where they select a pollutant and a particular water body that they're interested in studying, and then they write a paper on that and present. So they get to get more familiar with pollutants in certain areas.
So we've been sort of looking at climate change right now at a very, I guess, university level thing, but on a national level, we were wondering, what are your thoughts on Joe Biden's climate change plan focused on achieving 100% clean energy economy in the US by 2050? It seems very ambitious, but what are your thoughts? Do you think it can be done, and how?
So I looked at his plan, and what he says is net zero emissions by 2050, which is different than zero emissions. Net zero just means that you offset emissions, maybe by doing some carbon sequestration. I don't know what kind of engineering will be in place by then, or by planting forests. But there are different ways to draw down greenhouse gases. But if he really means to be using entirely renewable energy, that's something else we need to think about too. Because while we're fighting climate change, we don't want to be ruining the environment at the same time. That's a very important concern. Like if we are clearing land to just put fields and fields and fields of solar panels, we're going to be changing the landscape. We're going to be changing the carbon budget in that area. We're going to be displacing different wildlife that could go extinct or endangered in the process. And so are we just trying to build all these things because we think it looks like we're solving a problem when actually we're causing all these other downstream problems that right now we can do it, but it costs far more than we get out in energy. Like it's very, very expensive for us to do. So I don't know if he means that. So I think that we should keep an open mind and not say all fossil fuels are bad, they need to go away by this time, but think like, where can we make our cuts and what are we, what is our goal really?
So you mentioned fossil fuels and gas emissions from people. So going off of that, What are some effective ways that people can reduce their carbon footprint in their daily lives?
So as of 2018, the highest sources of carbon dioxide emissions for the US are in transportation. So that is a definite issue, right? And so 33%, that's about a third of carbon dioxide emissions, come from transportation. And so I would say that you want to cut down on your commuting. If you're traveling long ways by yourself, is there a way that you can carpool, try to bike more, walk more, take public transportation, right? Something, if you want to think about methane, the largest emitter of methane at 28% is enteric fermentation. What that is digestion in ruminant animals like cows. Like that's actually the biggest emitter. So if you think about the demand for beef, right? So cutting down on your beef intake, for example, or even your dairy intake.
What do you think people can do in their daily lives to prevent ocean acidification, kind of like reducing their carbon footprint?
So as far as ocean acidification is concerned, it's not going to be that much different than what you would be doing to reduce your carbon footprint. I think even a bigger concern, not necessarily a bigger concern, but another one that we have some control over that is a concern are microplastics or plastics in the ocean, right? And being aware of where these microplastics come from, because they come from everywhere. So a lot of our clothing is even made with synthetic fibers. So if you look at the label of what your clothes are made out of, and these plastic fibers get into the water, and different organisms that filter feed, like scallops, for example, water just flows through them, they get nutrients, but then also those little tiny fibers, those plastic fibers get into them as well, and we eat them, and it's this amplifying effect. So thinking about that as well, and just being a conscientious consumer.
So we just talked about a bunch of little things that people can do to help climate change, but going back to a national view, what would you personally like to see accomplished by the US government to fight against climate change?
So I think that providing incentives and also installing regulations is something that the government can do. So I don't know if that is a carbon tax or cap and trade. I'm not going to pretend like I know what all the downstream impacts of that are, because I know some arguments of carbon tax are, well, if you tax companies for emitting too much carbon, they're just going to move elsewhere overseas, and then they're going to be emitting carbon there. It's one Earth. Like, it doesn't make a difference if it's emitted here or emitted somewhere out west or east or whatever. So I'd rather see the government, if they're going to do initiatives, I think that we need to focus on adaptation. I think we need to really fix aging infrastructure. I know that's part of Biden's plan, but I think we need to pick a few priorities.
On a lighter note, and looking again at like household solutions, do you believe that energy efficient appliances are worth the purchase? And if so, why?
I think they are absolutely worth the purchase. I mean, they cost a little more upfront, but then you're going to be saving energy on your electric bill each month, for example. And so overall, it takes less energy to run them. So I think they are definitely a good thing, a good purchase.
So going back to the class that you teach, it's obviously taken by students who are interested in climate change, but what's something that most of the students don't know before joining your class about climate change?
Most students actually don't typically know what a fossil fuel is, how they're formed, what the different types of fossil fuels are, and actually how electricity is generated are these things that I'm often finding.
Okay, and then going back to another lighter question, you mentioned earlier about cutting down on your meat and dairy intake. Does having a meat-free diet genuinely help the environment? If so, how? And another thing is, how much does it help the environment?
So I am actually a vegetarian. I have been for the past 12 years, and it wasn't some big environmental or philosophical thing for me. It was really, I got sad eating animals because they're cute. And so I won't eat anything with a face. So meat is not intrinsically bad for the environment if you think about it. If you think about just meat as a thing, right? We can now grow meat in the lab. So that's something that is starting to happen. So in that case, yeah, fine, right? But as we currently raise meat, beef has a really, really high environmental impact. So you're going to want to definitely limit your beef intake. And another thing that you should consider, aside from just carbon footprint, though, is water footprint for what you eat. So as far as beef is concerned, once again, a lot of water goes into raising cow, right? Nuts have a very high water footprint, pork, chicken, eggs, cheese. So it's just trying to really, if you want to have a small footprint, eating as local as possible, so then at least you don't have the travel emissions, right? And so eat locally, try to eat as many veggies, grains as you can, but you don't have to go all or nothing.
During some of your classes, what are the best questions that students have asked you?
I'm actually going to use an example that was not from one of my classes just because I think it's really cute. And I was giving a lecture at Amherst Cinema in Western Mass. So I was giving a lecture on climate change, and then I was introducing a film. And after the film, the audience asked me questions. And I got a question from, it was maybe like a 7-year-old. It was a young kid. And it was the beginning of November. And so the kid asked, what if there was an increase in emissions due to the increased production of Halloween candy? If I thought that had an impact on global warming. I thought that was really, really cute.
There have been recent studies showing tons of recycled items being thrown into landfills and oceans, causing many people to believe that recycling doesn't really do that much for the environment. What are your thoughts on this issue? And also, I'd like to add, for me and Avanthika's school, a lot of kids there think that what we put in our little recycling bins actually just gets like combined with the trash anyways, and it really doesn't help the environment. So looking at it from like my school's standpoint, but also like a worldwide standpoint, a lot of people just think that it doesn't really help the environment. So what are your thoughts on this issue?
I think that recycling can work when it is done properly, but that's also going to have to start with education and training, because a lot of people don't know how to recycle properly. And if you throw stuff into the recycling bin just out of like wishful recycling, right? Like you use a paper towel and you wipe it and it's all dirty and you're like, oh, but it's paper, this should be recyclable, to throw it in the bin even though it's not. What happens if there's too much food scraps, if there's like really greasy pizza boxes contaminating the recycling? There's not typically going to be a person that goes through and sifts that recycling, right? Sometimes there's an equipment that can pull out like aluminum and stuff, right? But if it's contaminated, it does get dumped into landfill.
But there are a lot of people who don't believe in climate change. So how do you deal with these colleagues and peers who don't acknowledge the issues and believe that it's a myth?
Unfortunately, climate change is one of those things that has somehow become a partisan issue, or bipartisan issue, if I use the correct language, where if you send out a survey, right, if you lean right, you're going to disagree with climate change. If you lean left, you're going to agree with climate change. But both sides, when sent a bunch of questions about what climate change is, couldn't answer the questions correctly. So about over 97% of climate scientists do now agree that warming is caused by human activities. That small percent that don't agree are not saying that climate change isn't happening. That's not what they're saying. They're saying that climate is something that is averaged over a 30-year period. So you need really like large data sets, like large time scales of data to do any kind of statistical significance test on whether we're making a difference or not compared to the geologic past. So I think that's a subtlety there.
Thinking about people who do believe in climate change, whether it's caused by humans or some other like natural causes, or whether it's just the way of the earth, who are your biggest inspirations that you think have greatly contributed to the fight against climate change?
So back at SUNY Binghamton, when I was taking lots of geology, I took geophysics with Dr. Stephen Dickman. And so he was like my first introduction to climate. And then my advisor at Cornell, Dr. Susan Reha, she was really, I was part of that climate program, and I got all my professors there were so great, and my peers. And I think it's those people that are doing the research, doing the educating, progressing the science every day that are really doing a lot to help out the environment.
So for college students who study in person, getting to college can be kind of difficult. And we talked about like some ways to get to places that's like safe for the environment. But what are some like ways of transportation for students that's also easy for them?
Well, luckily, most college towns, when you go to college, well, a lot of students live on campus. So at least you can walk to classes. So that's really nice. If you don't and you have to commute, there are lots of public transportation options typically. So take the bus. You can bike ride. I am personally super uncomfortable on bikes if there's cars anywhere near me, but some people are good at it and don't fall off. So definitely, if you feel safe, do that.
All right, that's pretty much it for today's interview. Thank you so much for meeting with us.
It was really, really nice for you to have me. And those were some really thoughtful and excellent questions.